I'm your host, Michael Callahan. This is Where We Go Next. And is it possible to make content online for a moderate mainstream audience when algorithms incentivize and reward extreme positions? With our ever-shrinking attention spans and a never-ending fire hose of available content, hyperbolic, hyper-partisan commentary on complex social issues is often the clearest path to success as a content creator today. Our guest this week is trying to create media for the middle ground while being honest about that very uphill battle. Kimura is a YouTube creator and documentary filmmaker tackling controversial political topics via on-the-ground reporting with average citizens and inquisitive interviews with relevant experts. Gen, thanks so much for joining us a second time.
Yeah, man, super excited. It's been a year and a half.
It is so good to have you back. You've covered many controversial third rail topics on your channel: the fatherless crisis, abortion, the Israel-Palestine conflict, the border crisis. So, as someone who's been on the ground discussing these issues with average Americans, what's wrong with America right now and what's right with it?
I think the biggest thing that's wrong is that people are so quick to jump onto whatever first opinion that they see that's reposted by their friends. And I think that's the first opinion that people adopt, and just how much our environment influences us. I think that's happening at like a large mass scale with the advent of social media right now. So I think that's what's causing so much of the divide, is that so many people aren't really stopping to think like, hey, what do I actually think? And just starting to adopt the first whatever opinion looks good amongst their friends. What's right about America is that we at least have a space where we can fuck up compared to certain other countries. You might not even be able to at least voice their opinions. That's what they say, right? Like with social media, the great thing is that now everybody with an opinion can share it. But that's also the bad thing about social media, is that anyone with an opinion can share it. So just like anything, I think the right and wrong coincides. But in this instance, what's unfortunate is that America seems to be more divided than ever. But what most people don't realize is that they agree with each other more than ever, too.
You've been able to spend a decent amount of time outside of America as well, including Brazil. What has been your perspective on how these issues are spoken about and covered in these other countries, right? Just going back to your point about some people don't even have the freedom to speak on these topics, or they're censored, or they're not talked about as much as they are here in America. And what has that done for your perspective on how America's doing?
What's actually interesting about Brazil is that they actually seem to have many similar political problems, although in Brazil, it's a lot more exacerbated and probably high stakes. So for example, like right now, like Bolsonaro, which was the former president who was ousted by Lula, who is the current president, that's more so on the left, I think is getting heavily censored and looking like he is being sued to never be able to run as a president again. And you can see it here too, right? In America, a former president is...
Sounds familiar. Yeah.
Yeah, a very, very similar thing. So I think one thing I've noticed is that just how like very often America's greatest export for years has been culture. It seems like actually politics is also maybe something that's always existed too as an export, but hasn't been talked about enough. So there's a lot of similar problems that we see here being talked about in Brazil, whether it be gender issues to wealth inequality. Well, that will happen anywhere, especially since Brazil is the most, I think, unequal country in the Western Hemisphere or something like that when it comes to wealth. So a lot of these problems, I think a lot of culture war stuff is starting to leak into Brazil as well. And it's becoming more of like a global problem that's talked about. I think a lot of similar problems abound in these different countries, but in Brazil, it's a lot more high stakes, right? Maybe this is a very ignorant and naive take to say, but and maybe a very privileged one to say, but I'd like to think that often whoever the president is doesn't really change too much of your problems. But it seems like in Brazil, especially those who are in abject poverty, can really have their lives changed by whoever the presidential candidate is.
Well, let's rewind here, because I think for people who are unfamiliar with your work or who haven't listened to the first conversation we had all the way back in January of 2023, let's give them some context. So years ago, when you were a kid, you did have your own YouTube channel. You were making comedy skits and raps. In your words, maybe you should have stuck with that and you would have 1 million subs by now, I think is what you wrote on Instagram. Instead of doing that, instead of continuing your budding comedic rap career, you pursued a more traditional path. You did the, quote, right thing after graduation and moved to Austin for a corporate job. but then COVID hit, right? And you had an existential crisis. Can you talk about that?
Again, I'm already starting off the podcast probably sounding extremely naive and extremely privileged, but I like to say that COVID was one of the best things that happened to me. Not obviously in the mass deaths and chaos and what the pandemic caused, but more so in the sense that it actually gave me time to think and allow myself space to have an existential crisis. Obviously, I was privileged enough to be able to even have that space to worry about other things besides, let's say, like money or a place to stay. But the pandemic really gave me like a time to think about, what do I want my life to look like? There was like a moment that I remember. I think I was driving to like my corporate job, and I think a lot of people can relate with this based on the feedback that I got. I had a straight up panic attack, like pulling away from my apartment. My vision went blurry, my like chest tightened up, palms started getting sweaty, and it was a big realization that I'll never forget, that, wow, like I'm probably just like mindlessly doing something that I don't see myself doing in like the next 10 years. So I think ever since that, and a lot of the time that I had during COVID, it allowed me time to just reflect to see, what exactly do I want to do? I think that's one of the hardest things to do as people, is to really think for yourself of what you want your life to look like. Because one, it's scary. Two, it's going to go against the grain of like probably a lot of your peers. And three, you subject yourself to failure, going down a path that's not prescribed in a textbook or what you were ingrained with in high school, middle school, and in college.
I relate to that. Let's go to August 29th, 2020. That was when you launched the YouTube channel. And you've had the same slogan the entire time: explore the unfamiliar.
Mm-hmm.
But the content of your channel and the way you approach these topics, the way you cover them, the way you edit them, the structure, the length of the videos, like so much has changed since you first started all the way back in 2020. So what was your initial plan with the YouTube channel? What were you initially thinking about doing? And what topics were you thinking about covering? And how did it become what it is today? Walk us through that growth.
To be honest, one of the biggest blessings of starting your YouTube channel is that you can try so many different things that you may not have the luxury of doing once you, quote unquote, build an audience. So I think in the beginning stages, for me, it was just like finding my lane. Like, what do I want to do? How can I find that intersect of things that I could see myself talking and doing for the next 10 years that also intersects with things that my audience would love to see, right? That's kind of the challenge of content. It's not just about making things that you like, although that is definitely the approach that you should always take. You should always try and find, if your goal is to build an audience, to find that intersection of what do the people out there that might consume your content want to see. So I think that was the natural evolution of it. I think my first ever street interview video was on America. And it's funny because it relates to the first question that I asked: is America like the greatest country or something? And I remember being terrified going into that. I've always been like an extroverted person and a good conversationalist, but doing something like that in front of camera and going out at night in Austin to do so was quite terrifying. But that was one of the first videos that I guess nudged me towards my lane of doing street interviews and talking to random strangers about social controversial issues. So since that evolution, I think that's taken me into a lot of those sorts of issues. I think my first, let's say, quote unquote, break was when I talked about trans athletes and whether they should compete against biological women. Then I had a string of really good videos regarding modern feminism and men, fat acceptance, and to the child-free movement. And that's how I naturally started finding my lane. But do I really want to do just street interviews with the public for the next 10 years? I didn't see myself doing that. I think what I found more interesting is getting away from the controversial topics and more so around issues like the child-free movement, like the fatherlessness crisis, things that aren't so divisive, because it was also kind of draining just talking about these kind of culture war topics. I didn't think it was really pushing the needle over revealing and going to different places and exploring those topics. I found a lot more enjoyment in that, whether that be going deep into, let's say, social media and how that's impacting kids, namely the Snapchat law case, where a bunch of parents are suing Snapchat right now for a lot of the deaths that are linked to Snapchat. Different topics like that is the direction that I'm now looking to take it into, just so I'm not going to be like that controversial figure that only talks about controversial topics.
I want to push back a little bit there.
Please.
Because I think that you cover these topics with a lot of nuance and empathy. And actually, I collected some comments from some of your YouTube videos, which I think really illustrate this. And I think also reflect really well on your fan base. Quote, I appreciate you actually doing journalism. It's very hard to find these days. Quote, What you are doing is what news should be like. No agenda, no opinions pushed in it, just pure journalism. Quote, your transparency and humility is admirable. This is the kind of journalism people want. Quote, I'm a millennial Canadian who feels lost among the chaos of our media and only want cold, hard truth. Give me the facts, give me the statistics. You do all that. Thank you for what you do and being an independent, unbiased media source for us lost among political divides. And perhaps my favorite one, quote, Gen's never been pregnant, but he always delivers. So I think that speaks well to how you cover these topics. But where I want to push back is, I don't think your topics have gotten less controversial. Some of your titles, right? Should we hire based on diversity? LA's homeless crisis can't be saved. Here's why. What they aren't telling you about the U.S. migrant crisis. Overnight in the world's most racist town. Is fatherlessness ruining Gen Z? Are white students welcome in a black-only college, right? Like, these are attention-grabbing titles about hot-button topics. I think what makes you different from a lot of YouTube creators who have very similar titles is that actually once you click through, you approach these topics with empathy and nuance. So I don't necessarily think that the kinds of topics from a viewer's perspective have changed that much, but I do think that you've gone from just on-the-ground street interviews, but I think you've blended that in with talking with experts, like people who actually know a lot about these topics, people who've studied it for decades. That's what I've seen woven in. Am I on base there?
You're on base. You're definitely on base. And it's kind of funny. Like, once you read out those titles and thumbnails, I was like, oh shit, you're right. I guess I haven't really like strayed away from controversy.
One thing I've always really appreciated about your content, Gen, whether it's your Instagram stories or your YouTube videos, you're not afraid to talk about how difficult it is to build a YouTube channel and build a social following with algorithms that are driving ever more extreme content. And it's harder and harder to hold the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm watching you struggle with that in real time, and you're sharing your struggle with us.
Yeah, man. It's something I've been thinking about a lot. Maybe this is a cop-out, but I think, let's say, for example, if I just decided today to be extremely left or extremely right and only kind of espouse those types of opinions, I would absolutely be at a farther along trajectory, at least when it comes to like social following.
100%.
But I can't do that. I really can't. It would just literally be going against my core and what I believe, right? I wouldn't be even doing social media if it wasn't for the mission that I'm doing right now. If it was like me doing some shitty lifestyle vlog, I wouldn't be picking up the camera and doing so. But at the same time, it's extremely difficult, because one thing I'm realizing too is that I'm sure I'm not the only one that's tried to do this. I'm sure a lot of these news organizations started not being like, we're going to be biased, we're only going to talk to these people. Maybe, okay, there's definitely some media organizations like that.
But they don't go viral.
Exactly, right? The ones that we probably used to look at as credible mainstream sources used to be like a lot more unbiased and nuanced. The reason why they strayed away from that is that it doesn't make money. And I'm not going to lie, I'm never going to sugarcoat how important money is, right? Important in being able to make an impact, important to be able to feel sufficiently rewarded, important to be able to actually build out a media company that takes a lot of capital. Money is important. I will absolutely never sugarcoat that. But to tie it all together, the struggle that so many people probably tried this, and there's a reason why they've strayed away. How can I still keep my integrity as stakes get higher? Since our last podcast, I've gone full time into this. Let's say I bring in investors. They're going to want certain results. If I build out more of a team, I'm going to have to pay off payroll, right? All these different things are considered when it comes to building the next big middle ground media company. How do I continue to maintain that? And I think the best way, at least for me, is talking about the struggles, because one, it's authentic and hopefully it comes off that way. But two, it keeps me accountable too. I'm not a perfect human. I'm not completely unbiased, but I'm trying to do my best I can to be unbiased as an imperfect human in a polarized world, and hopefully inspire other people to change the way that they approach issues. But it's hard, man. Once like I've gone full time, I've noticed many times where I think made short-term decisions because I'm considering money. It's something I'm working through, and I'm confident that I'll get through.
Yeah, you touched on this in an Instagram story, I think all the way back from March. You were talking about this YouTube creator named Hamza Ahmed. He had this YouTube video called How I'd Get 1 Million Subs If I Had to Start Again. And one of the things that Hamza recommended was making binge-worthy content. And you talk in that Instagram story about how, quote, I've been chasing views rather than genuine impact, end quote. I hate this word because it gets overused, and I think it often gets inaccurately used, but I think I need to use it. some of the issues around extremism online and this race to create ever more extreme content is a problem that's systemic because of algorithms and incentives that drive people to create that content. The people within this system are just looking to make money so they can survive, feed their families, make a good living. Let's go to your most recent video on squatting, which we'll talk about more in depth in a second. But there is an increase in squatters in homes across America because of an incentive system that causes more squatting. If you change the laws so that squatting is easier and it's harder to evict squatters, you will get more of that thing. Drug use in Portland. If you decriminalize drugs in Portland, an issue that you've talked about on your channel, you're going to increase drug use. So you create an incentive structure that causes a certain kind of behavior, you're going to get more of that behavior. So what is so fascinating about your own journey, Gen, is that you are trying to be like a good, decent human being within a system that is pushing you to not be.
Obviously, I'm no saint, right? I make mistakes all the time and I'm trying to be as good of a human as I can be. And I think it's always just like that Venn diagram of making content that you like and making content that the audience wants. It goes both ways too, right? It's like you can always blame like the incentive structures, but I think as much as possible, I want to take personal responsibility too to do things in a different way. Because I've named a lot of examples of people who, or companies who have maybe bended on their beliefs, but there's absolutely a lot of handful of examples of people who've stayed rock solid on their beliefs and values and still achieved success. You know, as much as flack and controversy that Joe Rogan gets, he's probably like a perfect example. He's probably the most powerful figure in media. But this guy just pretty much started this podcast because he just wanted to and for the fun of it. And he'll really talk to anyone. I think that's quite rare. And we all know at this point the amount of success that guy has had, right? He has a $200 million deal with Spotify, the biggest podcast in the world.
It's crazy.
But he's just one guy with a mic and young Jamie, his producer. And I think there are good examples that I can at least look up to emulate some sort of success while still being grounded in your beliefs.
So Joe Rogan is actually a really good example that can transition us into how you all of a sudden like skyrocketed in terms of your views and subs. So the last time we spoke was in January of 2023. 3 months later, on April 9th, 2023, Brett Cooper from the Daily Wire, which is a conservative media company led by Ben Shapiro, she showed her 4 million subscribers one of her videos when she reacted to it. And that video was, "Is Modern Feminism Hurting Men?" And a month and a half later, she reacted to another one of your videos titled "Birth Rates Are Falling, Here's Why." And you went from a couple 100,000 views a month, which, by the way, for our listeners, like in the scheme of the billion people who are on YouTube, is already in like the top, I don't even know, 1%, point something percent. But you went from a couple 100,000 views a month to 21 million views on your videos in the month of May alone, according to Social Blade. Talk us through that, man. Like, when did you find out that Brett had covered your videos? How did it affect you? How did it affect the channel?
I think it was actually one of my team members that linked it in her Discord. And I've seen Brett's videos before, right? I think it just popped up in my algorithm, but nothing in depth or anything like that. But that was a pretty cool moment in the sense that it was just recognition amongst people that are in this industry, whether they be left or on the right. It was really cool. And I think it kind of, you know, to be honest, validated my ego, right? Validated the work that we were doing. I think like in total, she's already reacted to 6 or 7 videos. But one thing I got to say, though, is that one, we actually haven't even privately talked or anything like that yet.
Wow.
Hopefully, maybe we'll collaborate in the future or something. But 2, I'm not going to lie, sometimes it pisses me off because 1, I've spent months sometimes working on a video and it takes a lot of work. She reacts to a video and sometimes gets double the goddamn views that I got on that original video. So sometimes I'm like, God damn it. It obviously still takes a lot of work what she's doing, but she probably shot that in 2-3 hours or however long it takes. And yeah, I spent like 2-3 weeks scripting, producing, going out to film and editing those videos.
Yeah, she's like reacts to the whole darn thing. You're like, hey, you're playing my entire video.
No, but she does a really good job. Like she knows how to react to content. There are some reaction channels that just straight up play your videos and then don't add anything of significance. She has like a really good presence in front of the camera, and it's obviously reflected in like the 4 million subscribers that she has. It's absolutely all love. I'm partly kidding, but it's just like shit.
It's a struggle. Like you're grateful for the attention, but it's got to be difficult when something you've worked so hard on gets double or triple the views in a reaction video. I totally get it. I think both those things can be true at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Without her exposure, you wouldn't have experienced some of that crazy growth that you did in a few months.
Very, very true.
And also, I'm sure you would have loved all 2 million of those views on her reaction video to go straight to you. So I totally get it.
No. I'm pretty much kidding. It's all a good thing. I think there's been a lot of controversy recently when it comes to fair use, especially in the YouTube sphere. But I think that it should be fair game within reason. Like I said, there are creators who just play those videos. And there's namely like a couple of streamers, I believe, one called XQC. I think he just plays videos, doesn't even react to it, sometimes even leaves because he's a streamer. And I don't think that should be okay. But I think reactions and all that, if you're adding significant commentary, is actually a great thing.
The key word is transformative. Are you adding enough of your own perspective to make something novel and new?
Yep.
But I think why your Joe Rogan comparison is so on point is Joe's podcast for like the longest time has been pretty apolitical. He has his own views, right? Like I'm sure you do yours. When Joe enters the voting booth and when you enter the voting booth, there are issues that you maybe lean left on or lean right on, or you're right in the center, like all of us, right? But in terms of what he wanted his channel to be, and I think in terms of what you want your channel to be, to use your own phrase, explore the unfamiliar, explore the topics that sometimes we feel too scared to talk about in public. Let's talk about those things in public. But I think with the Joe thing, right, he'll have a guest on or he'll espouse an opinion that, let's say, is coded right wing. And then the people on the right will dogpile him with love. But then it doesn't matter how many left-wing opinions he has. Once he's coded right-wing, the left abandons him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you see this on the right as well. I think how it works with the left is if someone's in the center or on the left and they say something that the right agrees with, they're really quick to abandon them. And I think how it works with the right, it's a little different. If you are identified as right-wing and then you show sympathy with a left-wing position, that's when the right abandons you. So in a video from a few months ago, it was called Fatherlessness is Harming Our Country. And Brett reacted to that video and she said, quote, "You guys know I love Gen's videos. They're so well thought out. They're so researched. I think he's a fantastic human being," end quote. And I think that sort of praise is hard to come by and it has to make you feel good, right? And in an ideal world, in the world I think you and I both want to live in, people on the right would share videos that they agree with and people on the left would share videos that they agree with, even if those videos happen to come from the exact same creator. People on the left would be like, oh, wow, I don't agree with this video that Gen posted, but I agree with this one. In an ideal world, there would be some huge left-wing Brett Cooper who would also share your videos. I think what happens, though, is we live in this flawed partisan world. If someone on the right starts reacting to something, even if it is from a neutral creator like yourself, that content starts getting coded as right-wing, even if the creator doesn't want it to. You see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, 100%. Most of the creators that have reacted to me, right, besides Brett Cooper, has been, I guess, people on the right wing.
Why do you think that happens?
To be honest, I'll push back on what you were saying earlier of the centrists and how they get pulled in either direction. I feel like from my experience, what I've seen is that at least generally for people on the left, they view centrists as being too pussy to identify as right wing.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
I do agree with you that, of course, both sides engage in that if they show sympathy to either side, they get branded as that. But to be honest, I've seen it more on the left. Maybe this is just like small sample size and my explanation.
There's definitely more of a purity spiral on the left for sure.
Yeah. I've gotten like criticism too from people on the left saying that, you know, you're a centrist, you're just too scared to say that you're right wing, which I think is like a ridiculous standpoint, to be completely honest. I wish more creators on the left would react to me. Maybe it's just the algorithm that I don't see, but the left creators that I would think would react to me would probably just only do it to hate on it. Namely, a good example might be like Hassan Piker. He's reacted to many similar creators, let's say, right? For example, there's this other journalist called Tyler Oliveira. I think he was just shitting on his videos. And I feel like if I get reacted to on the left, and maybe I just haven't seen it, it will probably be one of criticism because I have already been branded as right wing because other creators on the right have reacted to me.
It's all part of the same problem, right? Whether it's the algorithm that is driving creators to either post extreme headlines or make extreme content, or our political system, which encourages a crazy form of tribalism. And if you don't toe the party line, you get branded as like a traitor. Whether it's algorithmic or social pressure, we're dealing with stuff that pushes us from the center, that pushes us away from nuance. I'm sure you're experiencing forces right now that are like, again, just come on over here. come hang out with us on the right, man. Then you got the left being like, yeah, screw you again. You're just a centrist who's a right winger in disguise. And it just seems like we would all be better off if people just took you as you are. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's also going back to what we were saying, right? It's exactly why it's so hard to build a middle ground media company or to brand yourself as like centrist, because the only way I know I'm doing something right is if I'm pissing both sides off. If the left is calling me right and the right is calling me left, that's my barometer of like, okay, cool. I did a really good job of exploring both topics in this instance. But I think one thing to remember too is that this is also not most people though. Like most people, I like to believe, are quite in the middle. The people who are going to make these polarizing statements like centrists are all kind of right-wing pussies, let's say, are probably people that are like extreme. That's going to probably be like the loud minority. And often that skews our vision of reality. Because anytime I do go and talk to people or when people recognize me on the street, it's only been positive. I haven't really gotten anything that's been outright hateful or negative. And even in like my street interviews, most people who might skew on one side or the other, once I do challenge them, they seem to have quite reasonable takes.
Here's a problem that I think about a lot and I struggle with, right? I don't know if this is a perfect analogy, but let's say you ran a bakery. Your mission as a baker was to make baked goods that appealed to people who were worried about their health. And so when customers came into your bakery, you would reach out to them and be like, hey, what kind of stuff do you want to eat? But the answers that you were getting were, I want more of those chocolate croissants. I want more of those cupcakes and cookies. I want more chocolate cake. But I want to make baked goods that appeal to healthy people. But all the answers I'm getting are to make more sugary stuff. So what's the problem? The reason I bring that up is I was looking at this survey of college students. It's called the Generation Lab Survey. It was conducted from May 3rd to May 6th. It asked college students to select up to 3 issues that are the most important to them from a list of 9. The number 1 issue was healthcare reform, followed by education funding and access. And then after that was economic fairness and opportunity. And after that was racial justice and civil rights. At the very bottom was the Middle East conflict, the border crisis, and terrorism. The people who are your potential ideal audience, the people who are right in the middle, they don't go into the bakery. Like the people who want to eat healthy aren't going to the bakery. And maybe the people who are the average middle ground person might not watch a video about the border crisis because it pulls really low with them. But then also if you made a long form video about education funding and access, like a 30-minute video about education funding that was like really down the middle, it might appeal to those middle ground voters and middle ground college students, but it might not get very many views. People love sugary sweets and it drives a lot of attention to the bakery, but the healthy eaters don't show up. It feels like an unresolvable tension. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's very, very well put. But I think that's where it goes back to what we were talking about earlier of what does it actually mean to chase impact, not views, right? There is definitely a difference of what you would consider a high quality audience. Like what is the ideal kind of person that I want to be watching my videos anyways? It's like that never ending dichotomy because you do have to make those videos that might spread your channel further and spread the mission further. But you also can't abandon your core audience that is the ideal audience target that I would want in the first place. I think the next evolution of social media is going to be not just about reach, but more so how do you cultivate that ideal audience that really will become the 1,000 true fans. That's one of the reasons why I decided to start like my newsletter. And we are getting close to the concept of the 1,000 true fans. I think we're at like 950 like subscribers now or something. And it's that first step of being able to identify those who really are craving nuance in a world that's becoming a lot more polarized, at least on the outward sense.
Speaking of expanding your reach, increasing your network, you've done a couple of videos now with Jubilee. Like, how did that get started? How did they approach you? How'd that collab end up happening?
Yeah, just for context, I've been hosting and moderating their Middle Ground series. So yeah, I guess it was like a perfect fit in that instance, right?
Yeah.
For example, they might do one about is being fat okay or something, right? They get people who are for fat acceptance and then maybe one other side that might be fit people and they essentially like debate on different prompts. So yeah, that actually came about through their creative director that reached out to me, I think over like a year ago now, that said, hey, I really like your videos. We should hop on a call. Maybe there might be some opportunities. So long story short, from there is how we got into talks of me hosting like a couple of episodes. And yeah, it was a really good experience. I think it always helps to like collaborate with different people, especially that are in your space. And especially this, right? It was such like a natural fit with my own mission. But it was also a bit of a distraction for like my own thing, like going to Los Angeles every 2 weeks or whenever they needed me. So although it was like a good experience, I personally don't think I'll be moving forward with it because I think I need to focus more on my own content. How can I build my own thing instead of just helping someone else's mission?
I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, myself included, which is more than saying yes to opportunities. The best thing you can do for yourself is saying no to like pretty much everything except what you have your mind set to doing. I want to circle back to your most recent video. I want to make sure I get the title of this video right.
Squatters are taking over America. Here's why.
Yeah, sorry, man. Speaking of extremism, taking over America. No, but I get it. Had you titled that, squatting is a problem in a couple American cities, not the biggest problem. It only affects a few thousand people, but it is a problem to the people who are affected. And let's explore it. One, that's like a super wordy title that no one would ever read. And two, we can tie that into Jubilee, right? I think Jubilee gets a lot of well-deserved credit for bringing both sides of an issue, quote unquote, into a room and having them discuss. But I also think it's a false dichotomy to say that there's two sides and they're both very extreme and then they meet in the middle. Because as you know, probably from your social circle and talking with the average American on the street, most people walking around, most of my family and friends are not represented by the opposite extreme sides that are in a Jubilee video. You have like people who believe that abortion should happen right up until 9 months, and then people who believe that you should never have an abortion. And if we look at the actual stats of who that represents, that's like 10% or less of the American voting public holds either one of those views. And yet we put people with the most extreme views in a room together and say that we're creating nuance by having them talk to each other when really they don't represent the average American.
I mean, I guess nuance isn't exciting. It's hard to find really good ways to make nuance entertaining.
Yeah, you had this quote from one of your recent videos. You said, politics destroys nuance. It brings us to that squatting video, right? Squatters are invading America. Here's how. And there's something that you said at the end of that video that stuck with me because I want to dig into why you included it. So you lead the video in Austin, which is where you live, and you approach a man that you think is squatting on someone else's property. And that sort of leads us into the wider conversation around the issue as it's playing out around the US. You can tell that you have a bigger budget, whatever that budget is, because you're actually flying out, whether it's like the border crisis or the squatting thing, like you're flying out to where it's actually happening and talking to people affected, which is really cool. So you fly out to Portland and you speak with its residents, and it's a really great video. I'll link it in the show notes. But at the end of this 31-minute video, you learn that the guy that you spoke with at the beginning, the very incident that kicked off the video about the issue of squatting, was actually not a squatter at all. And then after you find that out, you say, quote, I wonder if it's right to show this. Did I even lead with empathy? Am I just trying to paint a picture of someone when it seems like that's not even the case? Am I just taking advantage of people in the shittiest situations? Am I even doing my explore the unfamiliar mission if I'm just taking advantage of people, end quote. So why did you include this man and his story if it wasn't actually related to the topic of the video? And why did you also include that moment where you wrestled with your culpability as a creator and journalist? The reason I'm asking that is there's really two camps of creators most of the time. There's the one camp of people who in the same situation would have not included the man's story at all because they would have been like, well, it's irrelevant. He's not a squatter. And there's another camp of people who would have kept the first half of the story in, the part that makes him look like a squatter, and would have kept out the second half because people lie on YouTube all the time, right? Lying is profitable. You did a third thing. You included all of it and you addressed it. Why?
I knew this was going to get a lot of pushback and controversy because you're totally right. If I really thought that, then why did I still upload it? Why did I still include it as part of the story? Let's just say for how it is, in a way, kind of a selfish decision, because I wanted to at least show that in the search for content, sometimes we might make up different stories to be able to create a better one. Because if it's like, okay, if I really do care about being honest, then why did I still include it? Why did I create this big kind of like cathartic ending talking about how bad I feel, but then I still crafted an entire story, edited it, scripted it in a way where it shows that? Completely fair criticism. But I think like what I wanted to do in that video is show that these are also the struggles that I'm dealing with as someone who is running like a middle ground media company, that many media outlets try and craft like a different story, in that oftentimes what I'm realizing is that maybe I'm not anything different. So maybe I'm not like wording this in the best way, but
No, but I want to push back on that because I think from my perspective, I think you're being a little hard on yourself. What's interesting to me, and it's been on my mind because I recently spoke with Pulitzer Prize winning journalist named Carlos Lozada. He writes for the New York Times. He's written for the Washington Post. He has this recent book out called The Washington Book. And it's a collection of essays that he wrote over the last decade or so. And his whole thing is he'll read political autobiographies or the biographies of like staffers who work for the president, or he'll read Supreme Court documents, like documents or books that you and I would never read because they're either super boring or really self-serving. You know, it's like, okay, great. I'm going to read a politician's autobiography. I'm sure it's going to be completely selfless and full of honesty. When in fact, like people are crafting narratives all the time. What is really interesting about Carlos's perspective is that he finds a lot of truth in the narratives that people try to construct. And his point of view as a journalist is that even journalists who are just on the ground trying to report facts as they see them still have to construct narratives around all those facts in order to make the story palpable. Because at the end of the day, again, like our lives are not like movie narratives in which things happen in like a concrete, understandable order. Life is chaotic. Things don't always happen according to some grand plan. But when you cover that story, you have to shape a narrative out of the chaos of life. If I told you 10 disconnected facts about my day, you're like, okay, well, how does any of that relate to anything else? But if I was like, recently a friend of mine got into a car accident and then that led me to this, and then that led to this, and that led to this, me taking 6 disconnected things, but making them seem all related to each other makes the story more interesting. So I appreciate that you did that last part of the video where you were like, hey, this whole story that you think kicked off the video that was about squatting, it's actually not. Because what you're basically saying without saying it again is, I could have done this other worse thing and I didn't, and it's eating me up inside.
yeah, I think you summed it up better than I could.
The people who should be hard on themselves are the people who don't include that last bit. The people who should be hard on themselves are all the videos we've watched on YouTube where they just lie and they don't tell us they're lying.
Yeah. Because look, hopefully I made it pretty clear in the video that I can't really get on board with squatters, right? Like in the sense that you're literally taking over someone's property. But I think what I wanted to include in that last bit is that who you might think as like a squatter might not also be a squatter too. I think that's also like the perspective that I wanted to provide in the end, in addition to what you beautifully summed up for me. Yeah, this is my struggle as like a creator. How do I maintain honesty while making a narrative that people would want to watch, but then being honest about my pitfalls too? The conclusion that I came to after wrestling with it, whether I should include this in the story or not. And I have no regrets. It was after a lot of deliberate thought of whether I should include this or not. As always, my channel has been about honesty. And I think as long as I'm admitting my mistakes, hopefully that gets me closer to living up to that value.
Have you seen the documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop?
I have not.
I strongly recommend it. Are you familiar with the graffiti artist Banksy?
Yeah.
Okay. It's a 2010 documentary. And long story short, minor spoilers, but this artist Banksy basically wants to show that he can take a random person off the street who doesn't even really have any artistic talent and endorse them as the next great artistic talent, and then watch as like elite art purveyors and like social media clout chasers all of a sudden all become obsessed with this guy who has zero artistic background and didn't exist before Banksy mentioned him. And now he's the hottest thing in the art world. And the whole point of the documentary is that through lying and manipulation and understanding the way that social cues work and how we all kind of move in a crowd based on what we think is the thing to do and the thing to follow, you can create hype and create a new artistic mogul out of thin air. And so what's so fascinating about that documentary and why your recent video made me think of it, and I think you could probably do some really cool stuff leaning further into this lane. That video that you did is distinct because, again, most YouTube creators do the first half of what you did and never show us the second half. Never mind actually comment on the struggle of crafting an honest narrative in our political landscape. Anyway, I'll get off my soapbox, but I think the way that we manipulate videos in order to create a reality that supports our side or makes for really awesome content is like super pervasive. And I just don't think most people grapple with that publicly.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I got to check out that documentary. That sounds extremely exciting.
You're going to love it.
But yeah, it just felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah. Okay, so the content that you've covered on your channel has changed over the years. You started off with talking more about your own personal struggles, and then that slowly became more on the street interviews with quote unquote average Americans. Now it's talking with experts in their field and flying out to exotic locations to do on-the-ground street reporting, like a Reuters reporter. Obviously, you want to keep creating content that is watchable and bingeable, right? To use a word that Hamza was using. But in terms of bingeable content, is there an area of journalism or content creation that you want to explore that you haven't yet?
I love that question because right now I think it's in a big transition stage. I found like my initial success through, I guess, like the street interviews and turning that into this mini documentary style. And that will always be like the essence, right? Whether I go to an exotic location or talk to these experts in person, there will always be some sort of aspect to that. One thing I've been thinking about is how can I do this long term? There's so many YouTubers that have come and go, right? The people that I used to watch YouTube as a kid, they probably don't even make content anymore. And the number one job for many kids growing up is to become a YouTuber. So it's not like the competition is going to fade out in any way. In fact, it's going to get harder and harder. But how can I do this in a way that's sustainable? I think like one thing that I realized is that for me, I have to absolutely enjoy what I do because I am not really good at bullshitting. I can't really put on a face and do something if I genuinely don't enjoy it. So that's something that I've been thinking about a lot too, right? And also avoiding the pitfalls of blowing up one way, but that one way was actually a very inauthentic version of yourself. And it's actually content that you don't really want to create, but now you're stuck in that trap. So right now I'm making 3 buckets. One is like basic street interviews where I ask different strangers. 2 is what I like to call investigation series where I fly out to an exotic place and do the on the ground reporting. 3 is what I like to call sit down investigations. And I think a perfect model of someone who has been able to do this right as they entered the next stage of their life was Johnny Harris, probably one of the most like respected independent journalists on YouTube. He was someone that used to work for, I believe, Vox. So he did a lot of on the ground reporting, would go to Colombia, would go to all these different locations. But now that guy has a wife and kids. So he's doing a lot more of these kind of sit down investigations where none of the essence is lost. Maybe he's not going to Russia to do that on the ground reporting, but he's providing a lot of research, a lot of commentary, a lot of well thought out storytelling. And he's doing it in the comfort of his studio. I think that's something that I've been thinking about a lot too, because right now I am looking to do more of these kind of investigation series where I go to different places. But one thing that I found out too is that's also a very quick way to burn out and not something that's sustainable, right? If you have to go to a certain location and go at it at like a moment's notice to be able to make like a good video that your audience wants to watch, that's also building a trap in and of itself. We've seen it with other journalists too. I don't know if you've heard about this guy named Your Fellow Arab who recently got kidnapped in Haiti.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So Haiti right now is in, political turmoil. This guy, I mean, hats off to him. He has absolutely massive balls to do this. He's even done like videos where he went to a Brazilian favela in Rio de Janeiro.
It's wild.
Talked to like gang leaders, things that like mainstream journalists have never been able to do. That's also a big wake-up call. Where does this go in this sensationalized route of journalism? After you make a video like talking to gang leaders in Rio, the natural progression is go to a country like Haiti where there's huge travel advisories not to go because gang leaders have essentially taken over the country. Where does it go after that? You have to keep topping it. You have to keep making a better video that's even more dangerous, even more sensationalized in order to get views. And this is absolutely no shade to him. Like I said, I have utmost respect for what he's done. But that was like a big wake up call of like, how do I continue to make content that's sustainable? So I'm thinking about a lot of different things. I think I want to continue to go to these different locations that make sense. Maybe it's just stray away from just only going to those places when something like major happens, but starting to cover stories that it's evergreen. So at any moment that I can go, it doesn't have to be like once something breaks out, like the border protests, I have to go and do all those things. But like really doing like a big mix of going to these different locations, but also being able to make videos in which I can share my thoughts right in front of a camera. I think that really is the path to sustainability, but then also changing the approach of how I do these investigations too. I recently bought like a GoPro, and what I'm actually thinking about doing is more so investigating. I think my biggest strength as a creator and as a person is just like my natural ability to talk to anyone. And I feel like I haven't really shown how I'm able to get people to talk to me and share their deepest desires and their actual opinions, whether it be an expert or a random person. I want to show more of that raw footage when I go to these different places. So one video that's coming up is I actually spent 24 hours with like the military police in Brazil.
Oh, whoa.
We went to 3 different favelas, We arrested some people. We trained together, different things like that. And I took along my GoPro as well. So that's going to be like my first foray into making it a lot more raw, showing my actual emotions as I'm doing these things, showing my actual conversations that I have with these people to get them to trust me enough to take me on a patrol in one of the most dangerous cities in the world.
What a pitch. I mean, I can't wait to watch that video. You just got to promise me I can't have you getting kidnapped in Haiti. So draw the line somewhere, man.
Exactly.
You want to transition to the Johnny Harris model, right? You want to be the guy behind the desk. You have, I think, 6 open roles currently, including long form video editor, short form video editor, thumbnail designer, researcher, etc. If you want to transition from Gen being a name to Gen being a brand, right? Like CNN, GEN, right? Have you thought about having street reporters who go out with either their own video equipment or video equipment you give them? Either they fly out or you hook up with people who are already living in those towns who become basically part of your media company. And then they might be doing the on the ground interviews, but then you're the guy who ties it all together. You're the guy who has the narrative, who's talking in, his studio. And then you cut to these on the ground reporters in the same way that like a more traditional media company would do.
Yeah, you know what? I'm really glad that you brought that up. That's, I think, the natural progression is, if I want to do this in the next 10 years, is having those on the ground reporters all around the world that can execute on like a moment's notice. One video that I'm making actually at the moment is I'm getting all the top independent journalists on YouTube together for a video on the fall of like mainstream media and the rise of independent journalists, especially in these platforms like YouTube and then also X, formerly Twitter. I think like the future of journalism is going to be citizen journalism, people that are reporting on the ground that see it. And I think it's going to not be as centralized as it has been. And just as we've seen many different industries start to become a lot more decentralized, I think journalism is heading towards that same path. So obviously I have a decent amount of experience so far in like my 3 years of doing this. One thing that I'm starting to think about is hoping to train other people start their own channels, hoping to start creating that Gen network and making it in a way where they're also properly incentivized to want to do so. And I'm properly incentivized to help them become that citizen journalist. Yeah, that's also an offer that I'm starting to think about right now as I start thinking towards the next 5-10 years, because I don't ever want to lose that essence of going to those different places. And that's what makes the content unique. And that's what I think shows the rise of independent journalism so far, is that a lot of mainstream media outlets stopped doing that, or at least stopped doing it in a way that was genuine and that really covered what was going on.
Back in 2020, when you first started this channel, I imagine you had zero experience in journalism, investigative reporting, and now you're knee deep in it. So you didn't go to school for this. You had to learn on the ground doing it, messing up, trying again, getting better at it. What have you learned about journalism, about investigative reporting over the last few years?
I think the biggest thing I've learned is really the importance of building trust and being genuine. That sounds extremely obvious, but one thing I realize is that people can really detect if you're coming from a genuine place or not. Also, the importance of keeping your mental health in check and showing up in the right energy, because I've had moments where I was feeling very tired, exhausted, unconfident. And when I went out to try and investigate things or ask people questions, people either didn't really want to talk or could only really give me surface answers because I wasn't really doing my job of getting people to want to share whatever they truly believed to their core. So I think that's one of the biggest things that I've realized is how important it is that you show up in like the right way, and that involves filling your cup up whatever way works for you. Because when you're going to talk about very controversial issues that many people aren't really allowed to talk about, whether it be in their workplace or in their school, or don't have the closest of friends to really be able to share these beliefs, why the hell would they tell some random stranger with a mic and a camera in their face to do so? So I think the biggest thing is, as soon as possible, be genuine, cultivate some sort of trust, and make sure that you're taking care of yourself, because the energy that you put out, people automatically detect that to make a split decision on whether they, one, want to talk to you, or two, really get deep with you to share whatever they truly believe to their heart.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, over the past 5 or so years, I feel like a big theme has been a loss of trust in our major institutions. journalism institutions, academic institutions, scientific institutions, Americans across the board have lost trust. And I think it's that feeling that you can't take what someone is saying to you at face value anymore. And I don't know how we get out of it. And I think it's wild to me in a way that reflects well on you, but it's wild to me that instead of looking to our institutions for facts and for honesty, we're now looking to creators like yourself who 4 years ago had no experience doing this sort of thing, had no experience doing on the ground investigative journalism, and now they're going to you. That's a wild turn that if had you asked me like 10 years ago, hey, what do you think is the future of news, Michael? I wouldn't have been like, well, I think during COVID, there's this guy who works for Salesforce who's going to decide that he wants to, do investigative reporting on the border between Mexico and Texas. And he's going to be more thoughtful than someone from like Fox News. I wouldn't have believed it, but that's where we are today. I think a big theme of this conversation has been the struggle to remain honest and genuine and purposeful in a system or in a setting that encourages extremism, encourages dishonesty. Even on YouTube, as a small creator, you're susceptible to the same forces that are causing a lack of trust in our larger institutions. It's like you said, if you wanted to be a hardcore right-wing or hardcore left-wing YouTube creator, you'd have like probably triple the subscribers or more. So what's the future for people like yourself who don't want to go to an extreme, but also are fighting against the algorithm every day, which is trying to make you extreme?
I think what's helped for me is creating a mission statement extremely early. I created my mission statement and like my values list when I was at 1,000 subscribers, probably.
I remember that statement. Yeah.
So being rock solid in your foundation from the very beginning, not after you blow up or not after you've amassed a certain amount of viewership and subscriber count, but extremely early defining what type of content do I want to make? Of course, that will always change in your natural progression, but what is the why of why you want to even create in like the first place? I think that has served me well because again, I'm extremely imperfect as you've seen in my latest video and even the mishaps that I made probably throughout this podcast as well of things that I'm saying. But one thing that has at least helped me stay the course and allow me to be honest when I didn't need to be, or maybe when others wouldn't be, the mission statement. Because one thing about content is that at least with like the type of stuff that I make, what I say out in public has at least helped me stay accountable of how I want to act in private as well. It's been like a continuous feedback loop of what am I saying in my videos? Am I even like living up to that? And how am I even living my private life? Does that even translate to this persona that I've created in the public sphere? I think the biggest thing is creating a mission statement. And I think that will help you ride the waves and the ups and downs of content and staying true to your mission and why you decided to even start in the first place.
Again, I'm really glad that you are out there having these conversations, grappling with the tough questions honestly and openly. And importantly, I really appreciate that you're being vulnerable and transparent about it, because I think those moments when you pull the curtain back and let us in, I actually think those moments are what define your channel for me. There are so many creators out there who are trying to do the same thing you're doing, and there are many people doing it well. But I think when you take that moment, you say, hey, I'm grappling with being fair in this video, and it's tough because I have my own biases, or I'm having trouble seeing the other side here, and I'm letting you in on that. I feel like that defines you, and I think it speaks well to who you are. So I hope you continue to grow the audience that you deserve. And since you're right down the street from him now in Austin, I hope to see you on Joe Rogan someday.
You know what? That will be a really great goal. I think in the past, maybe people have been like, oh, I wish I could be on Jimmy Kimmel's shows or some David Letterman talk show. But yeah, now obviously things have changed. I think that will be extremely, extremely cool. If one day I'm on Joe Rogan and you know what? I'm going to make it happen. Appreciate that, man.
Of course.
Dude, I got to say, I love your questions. It's so intellectually stimulating talking with you. And it's a testament to probably how much research you do and prep for each guest. So yeah, I'm not just saying this. I just want to say I really enjoyed this conversation, man. It got me thinking a lot too. I always like to say when people ask me, how do I get inspiration for ideas? It's always conversations like this. That's how I like to think through things. And that's probably why I do what I do and have the conversations that I want to have. So I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart.
Of course, man. Let's have another conversation in 2025 and see where you're at.
Let's do it. Let's absolutely do it.